and the film depicted African Americans, most played by white actors in blackface, as uncouth, unciviled rabble. There's your hero, liberals, Woodrow Wilson. While the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, publicly denounced the movie's blatant appeals to racial prejudice, the president organized a private screening of his friend's film in the White House for the members of his cabinet and their families. Wilson observed, "It's like writing history with lightning, and my only regret is that it is all so terribly true." Now here's the exchange between Woodrow Wilson and Trotter. Remember Monroe Trotter, the Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Harvard, Boston newspaper editor, an African-American who was meeting with Wilson. He says, "Mr. President, we are here to renew our protest against the segregation of colored employees in the departments of our national government. We'd appeal to you to undo this race segregation in accord with your duty as president and with your pre-election pledges to colored American voters. We stated that such segregation was a public humiliation and degradation, and entirely unmerited and far-reaching in its injurious effects." Wilson's response: "The white people of the country, as well as I, wish to see the colored people progress and admire the progress they have made already, and want to see them continue along independent lines. There is, however, a great prejudice against colored people. It will take 100 years to eradicate this prejudice, and we must deal with this as practical men. Segregation is not humiliating, but a benefit, and ought to be so regarded by you gentlemen. If your organization goes out and tells the colored people of the country that it's a humiliation, they will so regard it. But if you do not tell them so and regard it rather as a benefit, they will regard it the same. The only harm that will come will be if you cause them to think it's a humiliation." Monroe Trotter responded, "It is not in accord with the known facts to claim that segregation was started because of race friction of white and colored federal clerks. The indisputable facts of the situation will not permit of the claim that the segregation is due to the friction. It is untenable, in view of the established facts, to maintain that the segregation is simply to avoid race friction, for the simple reason that for 50 years white and colored clerks have been working," they're talking about the civil service, "have been working together in peace and harmony and friendliness, doing so even through 2 President Grover Cleveland Democratic administrations. Soon after your inauguration began, segregation was drastically introduced in the Treasury and Postal Departments by your appointees." Wilson's response: "If this organization is ever to have another hearing before me," meaning the NAACP, "it must have another spokesman. Your manner offends me. Your tone with its background of passion." Mr. Trotter said, "But I have no passion in me, Mr. President. You're entirely mistaken. You misinterpret my earnestness for passion." As Barnett writes, "A swell guy, huh?" After resigning from the Socialist Party to support Wilson, W.E.B. Du Bois was appalled at Wilson's racist policy. He said President Wilson's initial policy measures were so stridently anti-black, it is written, Du Bois felt obliged to write another open letter to Wilson in September 1913. He was blunt, writing, "It's no exaggeration to say that every enemy of the Negro race is greatly encouraged, that every man who dreams of making the Negro race a group of menials and pariahs is alert and hopeful." Now, listing the most notorious racists of the era, including Pitchfork Ben Tillman, Du Bois wrote that they were undoubtedly encouraged, since not a single act or single word from Wilson has given one reason to believe that he will act positively with respect to African Americans, citing the removal of several black appointees from office and the appointment of a single black who is, quote, "such a contemptible cur that his very nomination was an insult to every Negro in the land." Although the segregationist and discriminatory policies of Wilson in his first 6 months alone were judged by Du Bois to be the gravest attack on liberties of African Americans since emancipation. You want to hear more about Woodrow Wilson, the great liberal hope, the man who brought Fabian socialism firmly into the country, the man who, believe it or not, Barack Obama's policies parallel, obviously not as applies to race, but as applies to an activist centralized government, and virtually every Democrat president since. Woodrow Wilson, the liberal, the progressive, the statist, was a racist through and through. Oh, and did I mention he was a Democrat? The DNC website, labeled Party History, is in fact scrubbed clean of the not-so-little dirty secret that fueled the Democrats' political success for over a century. Make that over a century and a half, actually. And made American life a hell on earth for black Americans. Literally, the DNC official history, which begins with the creation of the party in 1800, gets to the creation of the DNC itself in 1848, and then poof, the next sentence says, as the 19th century came to a close, the American electorate changed more and more rapidly, unquote. Quickly heads into a riff on poor immigrants coming to America. In a stroke, 52 years of Democratic history vanishes. Disappeared faster than the truth in the Clinton administration. Why would this be? Well, Lord says, allow me to sketch in a few facts from the missing 52 years. For that matter, let's add in the facts from the party history before and after those 52 years, since they aren't mentioned either. So what's missing? There's no reference to the number of Democrat Party platforms supporting slavery. There were 6 from 1840 through 1860. There's no reference to the number of Democrat presidents who owned slaves. There were 7 from 1800 through 1861. There's no reference to the number of Democrat Party platforms that either supported segregation outright or were silent on the subject. There were 20 from 1868 through 1948. There's no reference to Jim Crow as in Jim Crow laws, nor is there reference to the role Democrats played in creating them. These were the post-Civil War laws passed enthusiastically by Democrats in that pesky 52-year period, the DNC's missing years. These laws segregated public schools, public transportation, restaurants, restrooms, and public places in general, everything from water coolers to beaches. The reason Rosa Parks became famous is that she sat in the white-only front section of a bus. The white-only designation, the direct result of Democrats. There's no reference to the formation of the Ku Klux Klan, which, according to Columbia University historian Eric Foner, became a military force serving the interests of the Democrat Party. Nor is there reference to the University of North Carolina historian Alan Trelease's description of the Klan as the terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. And by the way, I'm sure there's no reference to Franklin Roosevelt, right? Picking who would become Justice Black as the first Supreme Court of Justice of his appointment, who was a lawyer for the Klan in Alabama, for God's sakes. There's no reference to the Democrats opposed to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. The 13th banned slavery. The 14th effectively overturned the infamous 1857 Dred Scott decision made by Democrat pro-slavery Supreme Court justices by guaranteeing due process and equal protection to former slaves. And the 15th Amendment gave black Americans the right to vote.